Book 2, Chapter 5, Part 2 of History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1 by Henry Charles Lea, Book 2, Chapter 5, Popular Hostility, Part 2. Perhaps less irritating but more serious in its effects was the use made of the fuero by those engaged in trade. Inquisitor General Deza in 1504 issued a stringent prohibition against any salaried official having an interest, direct or indirect, in any business. Daily experience, he said, showed how much opprobrium and disturbance it brought upon the Inquisition. Wherefore he decreed that it should, ipso facto, deprive the offender of his position and subject him to a fine of 20,000 maravedis. He should cease to be an official as soon as contravention occurred, and the receiver, under pain of 50 ducats, should cut off his salary. All officials cognizant of such a case should notify the Inquisitor General within 15 days, under pain of major excommunication, and this order was to be read in all tribunals in presence of the assembled officials. The severity of this regulation indicates the recognized magnitude of the evil, and its retention in the compilation of instructions shows that it was considered as remaining in force. Like all other salutary rules, however, it was slackly enforced from the first, and the Catalans took care to have the prohibition embodied in the bull Pastoralis Officii. It gradually became obsolete. A royal decree of August 9, 1725, in exempting from taxation the salaries officials of the Tribunal of Saragossa, adds that, if they possess property or are in trade, those assets are taxable, showing that their ability to trade was recognized. How aggravating was the advantage which they thus enjoyed can be gathered from a Valencia case of about 1750. Joseph Segarra, the contador of the tribunal, entered into partnership with Joseph Miralles, a carpenter, to bring timber from the Sierra de Cuenca. In the settlement, Segarra claimed from Miralles a balance of 1,779 libras. They entered into a formal agreement to accept the arbitration of Dr. Boyle, but Segarra rejected the award, and Miralles sought to enforce it in the royal court. Then the tribunal intervened, asserting the award to be invalid because Segarra could not divest the Inquisition of its jurisdiction, and it refused the request of the regent for a conference and a competencia. Evidently it was dangerous to have dealings with officials. They always had a winning card up the sleeve to be played when needed. As regards the great army of familiars, it was of course impossible to prevent them from trading. In fact, traders eagerly sought the position in view of the advantages it offered of having the Inquisition at their backs, whether to escape payment of debts, or to collect claims, or to evade customs dues, or in many other ways not recognized by the Concordias, but allowed by the tribunals. The Suprema occasionally warned the inquisitors not to appoint men of low class, such as butchers, pastry cooks, shoemakers, and the like, or traders whose object was protection in their business. But no attention was paid to this. A large portion of the familiars was of this class, and the space occupied in the formularies by forms of levy and execution and sale and other similar matters shows how much business was brought to the tribunals by the collection of their claims. The opportunities thus afforded for fraudulent dealings, for evading obligations, and for enforcing unjust demands were assuredly not neglected, and may be reckoned among sources of the animosity felt for everyone connected with the Holy Office. In the remarkable paper presented in 1623 to the Suprema by one of its members, many of the abuses of the Inquisition are attributed to the indifferent character and poverty of the officials. It would be well, the writer says, to appoint none but clerics, holding preferment to support themselves and unencumbered with wife and children. They would not, when dying, leave penniless families, which obliges the Inquisitor General to give to the children their father's offices, thus bringing into the tribunals men who cannot even read. An increase of salaries also would relieve them from the necessity of taking bribes under cover of fees, and thus would put a stop to the popular murmurs against them. The inquisitors, moreover, should have power of removal, subject to confirmation by the Suprema, for now their hands are tied, their subordinates are unruly and uncontrollable. The greatest injury to the reputation of the Holy Office arises from its bad officials, who recognize no responsibility. No one should be appointed to office or as a familiar who is a tailor, carpenter, mason, or other mechanic. It is these people who cause quarrels with the secular authorities, for they have little to lose and claim to be inviolable. In short, if we may believe the writer, the whole body of the tribunals, except the inquisitors, was rotten. None of the officials, from the fiscals down, were to be trusted, for all were eagerly in pursuit of dishonest gains, robbing the Inquisition itself and all who came in contact with it, and to this he attributed its loss of public respect and confidence. Matters did not improve, for the Suprema always defended the tribunals from all complaints, and its tenderness towards delinquents assured them of virtual impunity. At length, as we have seen, in 1703, Philip V made an attempt at reform. It was probably owing to this pressure that in 1705 the Suprema issued a Carta Acordada prohibiting a number of special abuses, and pointing out that, in regard to the proprieties of life, neither inquisitors nor officials obeyed the instructions, consorting with improper persons, and intervening in matters wholly foreign to their duties, thus rendering odious the jurisdiction of the Holy Office. From various incidents alluded to above, it is evident that this produced little amendment, but when the vacillation of Philip V was succeeded by the resolute purpose of Carlos III and his able ministers, the power of the Inquisition to oppress was greatly curbed. It was not alone the commonalty that had reason to complain of the extended jurisdiction claimed by the Inquisition. The feudal nobles, whose rights were already curtailed by the growth of the royal power, were restive under the interjection of this new and superior jurisdiction, which recognized no limitations or boundaries, and interfered with their supremacy within their domains. Thus, in 1553, the Duke of Nájera complained that, in his town of Navarrete, the commissioner of the Inquisition had insulted his alcalde mayor, and then, with some familiars, had forcibly taken wheat from his alguacil. Inquisitor General Valdez wrote to the Tribunal of Calahorra to investigate the matter and to punish the officials if found in fault. The alcalde and alguacil were not to be prosecuted save for matters pertaining to the Inquisition, and this not only in view of its proper administration, but because he desired to gratify the Duke. A still more serious cause of complaint, to which the nobles were fully alive, was the release of their vassals from jurisdiction by appointment to office. In 1549, the Countess of Nieva appealed to Valdez, setting forth that Arnedo was a place belonging to the Count. It was within 3 leagues of Calahorra, and there had never been a familiar there until recently Inquisitor Valcleolivas had appointed some peasants in order to enfranchise them from the jurisdiction of their lord. It was not just that. While the Count was absent from the kingdom on the king's service, his peasants should be thus honored in order that they might create disturbance in the villages and interfere with the feudal jurisdiction. It may well be doubted whether her request for the revocation of the commissions was granted, but that her prevision of trouble was justified is seen in a case before the Tribunal of Barcelona in 1577, in which Don Pedro de Queral, Lord of Santa Colonia, a powerful noble of Tarragona, endeavored to secure the punishment of 2 of his vassals, Juan Requesens, a miller, and his cousin Vicente. They were both familiars and seem to have been leaders of a discontented opposition which rendered Don Pedro's life miserable. The trees in his plantations were cut down, his arms over the door of his baile in Santa Coloma were removed and defaced, libelous coplas against him were scattered around the streets, but the cousins, being familiars, were safe from his wrath. Don Pedro died, but the trouble continued between his widow, the Countess of Queral, and a new generation of Requesens, who succeeded to their father's office of familiars. Finally, in 1608, she succeeded in convicting Juan Requesens of malicious mischief, but her only satisfaction was that he was reprimanded, warned, and sentenced to pay the costs, amounting to 115.5 reales. Such a case shows how feudalism was undermined, and we can conceive how nobles must have writhed under the novel experience of rebellious vassals clothed with inviolability. It is easy, therefore, to understand the detestation felt for the Inquisition by all classes, laymen and ecclesiastics, noble and simple. It was fully aware of this and constantly alleged it to the king when defending the tribunals in their quarrels, and when urging enlarged privileges as a protection against the hatred which it had excited. In its appeals against the curtailment of its jurisdiction in Aragon, it did not hesitate to admit that it had been hated there from the beginning, and that its officials were so abhorred that they would not be safe if exposed to secular justice, and, even as late as 1727, it repeated the assertion of the persistent hostility of the Aragonese. In Logroño, the inquisitors reported to the Suprema in 1584 that it was a common saying among the people that their life consisted in discord with the tribunal, and that it was death to them when there was peace. It was the same in Castile. The Cortes in 1566, when encouraging Philip II to constrain the Flemings to admit the Inquisition, gave as a reason that his success there was necessary to the peaceful maintenance of the institution in Spain, thus intimating that, if the Flemings rejected it, the Castilians would seek to follow their example. In the same year, the familiars alleged that the detestation in which they were held led them to be singled out for a special oppression in the billeting of troops, and, in 1647, the Suprema declared that nothing seemed sufficient to repress the hatred with which they were regarded, in support of which it instanced an unjust apportionment in Cuenca of an assessment of a forced loan. This hostility continued to the last, even though the decadence of the Inquisition in the 18th century diminished so greatly its powers of oppression. A defender of the institution in 1803 commences by deprecating the hatred which had pursued it from the beginning. Even in the present age, he says, of greater enlightenment, there is crass ignorance of its essential principles and a mortal opposition to its existence. Thus, notwithstanding the Spanish abhorrence of Jews and heretics, the dread which the Inquisition inspired was largely mingled with detestation, arising from its abuse of its privileges in matters wholly apart from its functions as the guardian of the faith. End of Book 2, Chapter 5, Part 2. Recording by Margaret S. Bayat, Orlando, Florida.
Appendix I, Part 1 of History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1, by Charles Henry Lea. Appendix I, List of Tribunals, Part 1. The permanent tribunals of the Spanish Inquisition were Toledo, Sevilla, Valladolid, Corta, or Madrid, Granada, Cordova, Murcia, Llerena, Cuenca, Santiago, or Galicia, Logroño and Canaries, under the crown of Castilla, and Saragossa, Valencia, Barcelona, and Majorca under the crown of Aragon. In addition were Sicily, Sardinia, Mexico, Lima, and Cartagena de las Indias, which lie beyond the scope of the present work. This distribution of the forces of the Inquisition was not reached until experience had shown the most effective centres of action. Numerous more or less temporary tribunals were erected and many changes occurred in the apportionment of territory. The following list makes no pretensions to absolute completeness, but contains the result of such allusions as I have met in the documents. Alcaraz. For some years there was a fixed tribunal at Alcaraz. In 1495 Alonso Hernandez, presented for a canonry, is qualified as Inquisitor of Alcaraz, and in 1499 Alonso de Torres is appointed as Inquisitor there. Army and Navy. The fleet organized for the Catholic League which won at Lepanto seemed to require a tribunal to preserve it from heresy, and Philip II produced from Pius V a brief of July 23, 1571, authorizing the Inquisitor General to appoint an inquisitor for each army of Philip II, whether by land or sea. The first appointment under this seems to have been Rodrigo de Mendoza, Inquisitor of Barcelona, whose commission as Inquisidor de las Galeras is dated March 21, 1575, together with one for his notary, Domingo de Leon, and instructions as to his duties. He was succeeded by Geronimo Manrique, who celebrated an auto de fe in Messina. After him was Dr. Juan Bautista de Cardona, but merely as commissioner, who served for 2 years, when Paramo, writing in 1598, tells us that the fleets were scattered and the office ceased to exist. If so, it was revived, for, in 1622, we are told that Fray Martin de Vivanco, chaplain of the galleys of Sicily, was appointed Inquisidor del Mar, and in 1632, it is stated that when a Principe del Mar was appointed, he took with him an inquisitor and officials, and all prisoners arrested by them were delivered to the nearest tribunal when the galleys made port. In later times the Inquisitor General was Vicario General de los Reales Ejercitos de Mar y Tierra, and as such appointed subdelegates to accompany the army, with the necessary powers. The jurisdicción castrense enjoyed by military men did not exempt them in matters of faith from the Inquisition, but the subdelegados castrenses seems to have possessed no judicial powers, and debate arose, in 1793, and again in 1806, whether they or the episcopal ordinaries should be called in to vote with the inquisitors in the cases of soldiers. Avila. When Torquemada built his convent of San Tomas in Avila, he provided accommodations for an inquisition, and in 1590 the prisoners accused of the murder of the Santo Niño de la Guardia were transferred thither from the Tribunal of Segovia for trial. It continued to exist for some years and had connection with Segovia, for, June 9, 1499, Francisco González of Fresneda and Juan de Monasterio were appointed inquisitors of Avila and Segovia, residing sometimes in one city and sometimes in the other. Balaguer. There were autos de fe celebrated in Balaguer, August 15, 1490, and June 10, 1493, but these were held by the inquisitors of Barcelona, as they did in Tarragona, Gerona, Perpignan, and other places in their district. In 1517, however, there would seem to be a tribunal there, for a letter of the Suprema relates to the murder of the assessor of the Inquisition of Balaguer. If so, it was probably withdrawn in consequence, for in 1518 the inquisitors of Barcelona are ordered to publish edicts against those who molest the clergy of Balaguer, for observing the interdict cast upon the town. Barbastro. As early as 1488 there was a tribunal with inquisitors at Barbastro, but in 1521 it was suppressed and incorporated with Saragossa. Barcelona. Established in 1486, it claimed jurisdiction over the Free Republic of Andorra, which was included by Arevalo de Souza in his visitation of 1595. Long after Roussillon and Cardanya had been retroceded to France, the Barcelona inquisitors in 1595 still styled themselves Inquisidores Apolistos, and el Principado de Cataluña y su partido con los condados de Roussillon y Cerdaña y los vals de Arán y Andorra. See Loreda, Tarragona, Tortosa, Balaguer. Burgos. There was originally a tribunal in Burgos, but, in the redistricting by Ximenes, it was included in Valladolid. In 1605, Philip III transferred the tribunal to Burgos, with orders to the inquisitors to eject any occupants of buildings that they might find suited to their purposes. In 1622 it was still rendering yearly reports of cases to the Suprema, but probably about 1630 it returned to Valladolid. When, in 1706, Madrid was captured by the allies under Galloway and Las Minas, the court fled to Burgos, carrying the Inquisition thither, but its stay was short and it soon returned to the capital. Cadiz. See Xeres. Calahorra. A tribunal was established here as early as 1493, when it celebrated an auto at Logroño. In 1499 it alternated between Calahorra and Durango. In the redistricting by Ximenes in 1509, it was incorporated with Durango, but was soon re-established. Cedulas of 1516, 1517, and 1520 indicate that, at this time, it was tribunal of the enormous district of Valladolid, but in 1522 the Inquisition of Navarre was extended over Calahorra. Then Navarre and Calahorra were separated, but in 1540 there was a redistribution, and Navarre and the Basque provinces were added to Calahorra. In 1560 a part of the territory of Burgos was set off from Valladolid and added to Calahorra, and, in 1570, the seat of the tribunal was definitely moved to Logroño. Calatayud. Calatayud was the seat of an intermittent tribunal at least from the year 1488, for in 1502 Ferdinand speaks of Juan de Agoviva, who for 14 years had served it as barber surgeon whenever it presided in Calatayud, and one of the first presentations to a prebend, in 1488, was Martin Marquez, described as fiscal of the Inquisition of Calatayud. A letter of the Suprema, January 22, 1519, addressed to the Inquisitor of Calatayud, shows that it was still in existence, but it must soon afterwards have been merged into Zaragoza. Canaries. The zeal of Diego de Moros, Bishop of Canaries, did not wait for the extension of the Spanish Inquisition over his diocese, but led him to establish an episcopal one by proclamation of April 28, 1499. It was not until 1504 that Inquisitor General Deza sent Bartolomé López de Trabaldos thither to establish a tribunal at Las Palmas, which seems to have commenced business October 28, 1505. It continued thus to the end. Cartagena. See Murcia. Ciudad Real. A letter of Ferdinand, November 8, 1483, announces the appointment of Licenciados Constanza and de Baltazar as inquisitors for Ciudad Real. May 10, 1485, Ferdinand announces the transfer of Costana to Toledo, to which place the tribunal was removed. Cordova. A tribunal was established in Cordova as early as 1482, at the instance of its bishop, the New Christian Alonso de Burgos. Its district comprised the bishoprics of Cordova and Jaén, the Abadia de Alcalá de la Real, the Adelantamiento of Cazorla, with Ecija and Estepa, to which Granada was added after the conquest. See Granada and Jaén. Corte. The Tribunal of Madrid was technically known as Corte. Madrid, originally a town of no special importance, belonged to the province of Toledo, and was naturally under the jurisdiction of its tribunal. As the royal residence under Philip II and eventually the capital of the kingdom, except during the brief transfer to Valladolid, 1600 to 1606, it furnished a large part of the business of Toledo. Toledan inquisitors came there to make investigations and even to try cases, of which we have examples in 1590 and 1592. Something more than this was felt to be needed, and the Suprema adopted the plan of calling inquisitors from other places to commence prosecutions and act under its instructions, of which the Licenciado Flores, Inquisitor of Murcia, in 1593, and Cifuentes de Loarte, Inquisitor of Granada, in 1615, are examples. The presence of the Inquisitor General, who did not hesitate to take action in emergencies, and that of an experienced commissioner, together with the frequent sojourn of one of the Toledo inquisitors, enabled speedy action to be taken when requisite, as occurred in 1621 and again in 1624, and seemed to render superfluous the organization of a special tribunal. Yet the want of it was felt, especially with the influx of Portuguese New Christians, who multiplied in the capital. As the pressure increased, Toledo furnished 2 assistant inquisitors to reside in Madrid, thus establishing a kind of subordinate court, but in 1637 it was reported that the establishment of a tribunal was positively resolved upon, with the added comment that this would sorely vex the Toledans. To their natural opposition it is doubtless to be attributed the postponement of what, to a Spaniard of the period, would seem a necessity to the capital. It cannot have been long after this that one was organized for, in the matter of the confiscation of Juan Cote, commenced in Toledo. We find it, September 10, 1640, sitting in Madrid, with Francisco Salgada and Juan Adam de la Parra as inquisitors. In the same year they suggested that the case of Benito de Valdepeñas, on which they were engaged, should be sent to Toledo as more convenient for the witnesses, which was accordingly done. Toledan influence is doubtless responsible for the action of Arce y Reynoso, soon after his accession in 1643, in suppressing the new tribunal and restoring the business to Toledo. The pressure, however, became too great, and Arce y Reynoso was obliged to reverse his action. The date of the re-establishment may safely be assumed as 1650, for a list of penitents, reconciled by Corte from the beginning, starts with 3 in 1651, and their trials can scarce have been commenced later than 1650. Yet the relations between Toledo and Madrid continued intimate. In 1657, Lorenzo de Sotomayor styles himself as Inquisidor Apostolico de la Inquisición de la Ciudad y Reino de Toledo y Asistente de Corte. To the end of the century, the former always alluded to Corte as a despacho or office and not as a tribunal, and Corte seems to have sent its convicts to Toledo for their sentences to be published in the autos de fe. Its jurisdiction was strictly limited to the city, while the surrounding country remained with Toledo. In some respects its organization was peculiar. About 1750 we are informed that its inquisitors were drawn from other tribunals who continued them on their payrolls, their places being taken by appointees who served without salary until a vacancy occurred. Selection to serve in Corte was regarded as a promotion, leading to a place in the Suprema or to a bishopric, although the incumbent drew only the salary from his former tribunal, with a Christmas propina of 100 ducats. It had no receiver, the Suprema paid its expenses and presumably collected its fines and confiscations. Cuenca. Murcia and Cuenca were originally under one tribunal. Some trouble apparently arose, possibly connected with the episcopal ordinaries, for Ximenes ordered, January 22, 1512, that cases originating in Murcia should be taken to Cuenca to be voted on and vice versa. Llorente says that in 1513 they were separated and Cuenca formed an independent tribunal, but documents as late as 1519 show them still connected, until, in 1520, we find Cuenca celebrating an auto. A letter of March 7, 1522, states that the Pope has given to Cuenca the see of Sigüenza, without taking it from Toledo, because Toledo has never visited it, although ordered to do so, and is not to do so in future. Then, May 31, 1533, the Suprema says that Toledo can exercise jurisdiction there without giving Cuenca cause of complaint, and in 1560, Sigüenza was restored to Toledo, yet in 1584 we find Cuenca exercising jurisdiction as far north as Soria. There would seem to have been some connection maintained between Murcia and Cuenca, for, in 1746, the former, in enumerating its personnel, specifies 9 calificadores in Murcia and 4 in Cuenca. Daroca. There would appear to have been for a time a tribunal in Daroca, for, in the accounts of Juan Royes, receiver of Aragon for 1498, there is an item of expenditure on the prison of the Inquisition there, which was duly passed. Durango. See Calahorra. As defined by Ximenes in 1509, Durango had jurisdiction over Biscay, Guipuzcoa, Alava, and Calahorra, with some neighbouring districts. Estella. See Navarre. Galicia, also known as Santiago. The earliest allusion to this tribunal occurs in a commission issued at Coruña, May 20, 1520, to Dr. Gonzalo Maldonado as Inquisitor of Santiago. It was probably some time before the tribunal was in working order, but in 1527 it had caused sufficient alarm for the Suprema to write to João III of Portugal, asking for the arrest and surrender of those who had fled from it, and in the same year a warrant for 300 ducats was drawn to be distributed among the inquisitors and officials of the Inquisition of Galicia. This was followed by a similar payment in 1528, showing that the tribunal was not self-sustaining. Apparently the harvest was scanty and the tribunal was allowed to lapse, until the scare about Protestantism called attention to the ports of the northwest as affording ingress to heretics and their books, for we hear nothing more about it until 1562, when Philip II, in letters of June 2nd and 26th, informs the governor and officials of Galicia that Valdes had dispatched Dr. Quijano there as inquisitor. They are no longer to prosecute cases of heresy as they have been doing, but are to lend him all aid and favour, and are to allow him to dispose as he pleases of the seats in his public functions, without disputes as to precedence. In 1566 we hear of Bartolomé de Leon as receiver there, which would indicate that it was at work and was making collections. Still, it had a struggle for existence, for it was discontinued early in 1568, but it was re-established within a few years, if Llorente is correct in saying that its first auto de fe was celebrated in 1573. A letter of Dr. Alva, its inquisitor, October 31, 1577, speaks of having, in the previous year, sentenced Guillaume de Meunier, he being the only inquisitor, with the advice of a single consultor, showing that the tribunal was sparingly equipped. In later years it became one of the active tribunals of the kingdom. Its district comprised Coruña, Pontevedra, Orense, and Lugo. Granada. Granada, after its capture, was included in the inquisitorial district of Cordova until, in 1526, the Tribunal of Jaén was transferred thither. Guadalupe. A temporary tribunal was organized here in 1488, which during its brief existence was exceedingly efficient. See page 171. Huesca. See Lerida. Jaca. A tribunal apparently existed here, which was annexed to Saragossa in 1521. Jaén. A tribunal must have been established here about 1483, for two of its inquisitors took part in the Assembly of Seville, which framed the instructions of 1484. It seems to have been discontinued, for September 2, 1501, Ferdinand ordered a certain Doña Beatriz of Jaén to abandon her house to the inquisitors sent thither, and seek other quarters until they should finish the business that took them there. This indicates that only a temporary tribunal was intended, but the situation was conveniently central, and it was one of those retained by Ximenes in his reorganizations of 1509, when he assigned it to the districts of Jaén and Guadix, with Alcaraz, Cazorla, and Beis. It was still in existence in 1525, as shown by a royal letter of that date, but in 1526 it was suppressed and united with Cordova, the tribunal being transferred to Granada. In 1547 the official title of the tribunal was Cordova y Jaén. Rodrigo tells us that it was re-established independently in 1545, but this is evidently an error, and the name does not reappear in subsequent lists of tribunals. End of Appendix I, Part 1. Appendix I, Part 2 of the History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1, by Henry Charles Lea. Appendix I. List of Tribunals, Part 2. Leon. In 1501 we hear of inquisitors of the province of Leon, whose district cannot have been confined to that province, for Ferdinand, writing September 2 to cousin Duke, tells him that they have occasion to go to his city of Coria, Extremadura, and asks that they may occupy his house while there. In 1514, also, there is allusion to the receiver and alguazil of the Inquisition of Leon. Apparently the term is a synonym of the Tribunal of Valladolid. Lerida. The provinces of Huesca in Aragon and Lerida and Urgel in Catalonia were united as an inquisitorial district at least as early as 1490, when we hear of the inquisitors of Huesca and Lerida taking testimony. In 1498 a letter of Ferdinand, October 8, announces the transfer of Urgel to Barcelona. Allusions to the tribunal continue to occur in the correspondence of Ferdinand, who in 1502 called away the inquisitor, as there was so little to do. Saragossa would not attend to heresy, and only the financial officials need be left. It was not discontinued, however. In 1514 there was an attempt to murder the inquisitor, Canon Antist, but in 1519 he is still addressed as Inquisitor of Lerida. In this same year, however, Charles V, in a letter of January 22, speaks of the tribunals of Huesca, Tarazona, and Lerida having been united with that of Saragossa, and when the people of Huesca complained, in the Cortes of Saragossa, of their citizens being carried away for trial, he ordered, under pain of 1,000 florins, that no one should interfere with the jurisdiction of the Saragossa tribunal. October 9 an inspector reported that there was no need of a receiver or other officials there, whereupon they were all dismissed. In 1532, however, the inquisitors of Saragossa undertook to appoint a receiver for Lerida, but were told by the Suprema to cancel it as this was a function of the crown. Logroño. In 1570, as we have seen, the tribunal of Calahorra was shifted to Logroño, which in 1690 defines its territory as the whole kingdom of Navarre, the bishopric of Calahorra and La Calzada, Biscay, Guipuzcoa, Burgos along the mountains of Oca, and the sea-coast as far as San Vicente de la Barquera, thus comprising the modern provinces of Navarre, Guipuzcoa, Biscay, Santander, Alava, Logroño, and a large part of Burgos. Llerena. Originally, Extremadura and Leon were combined. In 1500, Enrique Paez is receiver for the sees of Plasencia, Coria, and Badajoz, and the province of Leon. In 1509, Ximenes assigned to Lerida as its district Plasencia, Coria, Badajoz, and the lands of the military orders, but as late as 1516 it is spoken of as the Inquisition of Leon, Plasencia, Coria, and Badajoz. Its original seat was Llerena, but in 1516 it was transferred to Plasencia, and the receiver was ordered to sell the houses purchased at Llerena for the prison, because others will be wanted for the purpose at Plasencia. It was migratory, however, and in 1520 the people of Ciudad Rodrigo, Coria, and Herida were notified that it was about to leave Plasencia, and wherever it went accommodations must be provided for lodgment, audience chamber, and prisons. Finally, it settled permanently at Llerena, and towards the close of the 16th century Zapata speaks of it as the first tribunal of the kingdom, with the widest jurisdiction. Madrid. See Corte. Medina del Campo. The great importance of Medina del Campo as a centre of trade rendered inevitable its selection as the seat of a tribunal at an early period. In 1486 it was fully furnished with 3 inquisitors and an assessor, the abbot of Medina serving as ordinary. In 1516 we find it incorporated with Valladolid. When the court moved to Valladolid, the buildings of the Inquisition were wanted for its accommodation, and the tribunal, in June 1601, was unceremoniously sent to Medina, where Dr. Martin de Bustos was turned out of his house to lodge it. Its stay was short, for in 1605, as we have seen, it was transferred to Burgos, and there is no later trace of a tribunal at Medina. Murcia, also known as Cartagena. See also Cuenca. Murcia was a seat of one of the early tribunals, comprising the sees of Murcia and Cartagena. Cuenca, which was attached to it in the redistribution by Ximenes in 1509, was separated about 1520. Oran, some time after its conquest by Ximenes, was placed under the jurisdiction of Murcia. The see of Orihuela, although belonging to Valencia, on its suppression about 1510, was united to that of Cartagena, and thus fell under the tribunal of Murcia, where it remained after the restoration to episcopal honours in 1564. The tribunal of Orihuela naturally followed the same course on its suppression. Navarre. After the conquest of Navarre in 1512, a tribunal was established in Pampeluna, where it did not long remain. Then for a short period it was transferred to Estella. In 1515 we find it in Tudela, where Ferdinand orders the Archdeacon of Almazan to visit it, as it is in much need of reform, and soon afterwards he asks for a delegation of episcopal power, as Tudela was only a deanery. It was quartered in the convent of San Francisco, to relieve which, in 1518, the Suprema ordered appropriate buildings to be obtained. In 1521 and 1522, there was talk of removing it to Pampeluna. Then it was extended over Calahorra. Soon afterwards they were separated, but finally, in 1540, they were united and so remained. Soon after the transfer to Logroño we find the tribunal describing itself as en todo el Reino de Navarra, Obispado de Calahorra y la Calzada y su distrito. Navy. See Army. Oran. Paramo tells us that when Ximenes conquered Oran he commissioned Fray Yedra as inquisitor there. Lorente places this in 1516 and calls the inquisitor Martin de Baedecar, Ximenes' provisor. At that time, however, there could have been no tribunal there, for July 9, 1516, the governor Lope Hurtado de Mendoza was ordered to discover and punish those who were impeding the sale of property for the Inquisition, work which would have been entrusted to the tribunal had there been one. By this time it had probably been suppressed and placed under Murcia. Orihuela. According to Lorente, Ferdinand, August 7, 1507, united the tribunal of the bishopric of Orihuela to Valencia, which would infer its previous existence. It was reorganized in 1515, when Bishop Mercader appointed Pedro de los Rios as inquisitor, and he was sent there with a staff of officials, and the magistrates were ordered to provide quarters for el tiempo que fuere menester. This indicates that the tribunal was not expected to be permanent, and it was probably not long afterwards that it was united with Murcia. Osuna. In 1488, among the presentations to Brebens is one of Pedro Sanchez, qualified as Inquisitor of Osuna. Such tribunal can only have been short-lived, and must speedily have been incorporated with that of Seville. Pampeluna. See Navarre. Perpignan. August 9, 1495, an auto de fe was celebrated in Perpignan, but it was held by the Inquisitors of Barcelona. In 1518 there was only a commissioner there, but in 1524 there was a tribunal, with Juan Navardu as inquisitor and Antonio Salateda as secretary. It was not permanent, however. In 1566, when Soto Salazar was sent on his visitation to Barcelona, he was instructed to ascertain and report promptly details for the benefit of the inquisitor about to be sent to Perpignan to reside for the future, and what officials should be provided for him. It is doubtful whether this intention was carried out. In any event it was but transitory. Plasencia. See Llerena. Santiago. See Galicia. Saragossa. Established in 1484, the tribunal gradually absorbed all the minor tribunals, but parted with Teruel to Valencia. See Babastro, Calatayud, Daroca, Jaca, Lereda, Tarazona, Teruel. Segovia. Segovia claimed the honor of being among the earliest cities, after Seville, to possess a tribunal, but there was no representative from there among the inquisitors assembled to frame the instructions of 1484, owing doubtless to the resistance of the bishop Juan Arias Davila. One must have been established soon afterwards, for, in 1490, the prisoners accused of the murder of the Santo Niño de la Guardia were on trial there, when Torquemada transferred them to Avila. See Avila. In the redistribution by Ximenes in 1509, Segovia was incorporated with Valladolid, but in 1544 and again in 1599 the inquisitors of Toledo include it in their enumerations of their jurisdictions. Sigunza. A tribunal was early established in Sigunza, which must have been busy if we may believe the statement that an auto de fe in 1494 it relaxed 149 victims to the secular arm. In 1506, Deza dismissed the officials for the reason that it was about to be united with Toledo, a merger ratified by Ximenes in 1509. Toledo neglected it, and it was transferred to Cuenca. In the 18th century there would appear to be some kind of subordinate tribunal there, for about 1750, Saragossa, in a report of its personnel, states that one of its 5 inquisitors is assisting at Sigunza. Tarazona. A tribunal established here in the early period was merged into that of Saragossa in 1519. Tarragona. When in 1643 the inquisitors of Barcelona were ejected, they were, after some delay, sent to open their tribunal at Tarragona, where they remained until the suppression of the Catalan rebellion in 1652. Teruel. In 1485 a tribunal was established in Teruel after some resistance. At what time it was transferred to Valencia does not appear, but a cedula of October 2, 1502, is addressed to the inquisitors of Valencia residing in Teruel and Albarracin, showing that it was then subordinate to Valencia. In 1518 it was discontinued and the district was subject to the direct jurisdiction of the Valencian tribunal, but Cardinal Adrian, by a provision of November 21 of the same year, transferred it to Saragossa, and then, March 3, 1519, restored it to Valencia. This was felt by Aragon as a grievance, and at the Cortes of Monzon, in 1533, it asked that Teruel and Albarracin should be restored to the Saragossa tribunal, but the request was peremptorily refused, and they remained subject to Valencia. Toledo. In 1485 the tribunal of Ciudad Real was transferred to Toledo. At first the limits of its district seemed not to be clearly defined, for in 1489 the inquisitors were told to go to Guadalajara and Ferdinand ordered the local authorities to show them favour and allow them to make arrests. See Corte, Cuenca, Segovia, Sigüenza, Valladolid for sundry changes in the district. In 1565 the official designation is the city and archbishopric of Toledo, the city and bishopric of Sigüenza, and the bishoprics of Avila and Segovia, which apparently remained permanent, except the detachment of Madrid. Tortosa. For some reason the bishopric of Tortosa, although part of Catalonia, was subject to the tribunal of Valencia. When in 1697 Vendome captured Barcelona, the tribunal emigrated to Tortosa and established itself in the Colegio Imperial. Although peace was declared soon afterwards, it remained in Tortosa at least until 1700 and presumably stayed until the conclusion of the War of Secession, when it was reinstated in Barcelona in 1715. Tudela. See Navarre. Valencia. The old Inquisition of Valencia was reorganized in 1484, and continued to the end. As seen above, it parted with Orihuela to Murcia, obtained Teruel and Albarracin from Saragossa, and Tortosa from Barcelona. Valladolid. A tribunal was assigned to Valladolid in 1485, but did not get into working order until 1488. After this it was suspended, to be revived in 1499, as appears from a letter of Isabella, December 24, 1498. The northern provinces of Spain were comparatively free from heresy, and Ximenes, in his reorganization of 1509, assigned to Valladolid the enormous district comprising the sees of Burgos, Osma, Valencia, Segovia, Avila, Salamanca, Zamora, Leon, Oviedo, and Astorga, and the abbeys of Valladolid, Medina del Campo, and Sahagun. In 1516 the enumeration is the same, except the omission of Zamora and the addition of Ciudad Rodrigo and Calahorra. Roughly speaking, it may be assumed to comprise the whole of the provinces of Old Castile, Leon, and Asturias. Valdes, August 8, 1560, repeated April 12, 1562, made over the whole of this to Toledo, but the grant can only have been temporary, for in 1565 the Toledan inquisitors described themselves as of the city and archbishoprics of Toledo, the city and bishopric of Sigüenza, with the bishoprics of Avila and Segovia, and in 1579 we find the inquisitors of Valladolid styling themselves inquisitors of the kingdoms of Castile and Leon and the principality of Asturias. This enormous district it continued to retain, subject to the easternmost portion detached to Calahorra or Logroño, and to its translation in 1601 to Medina del Campo, and thence to Burgos, from which it was returned to Valladolid, probably about 1630. Xeres. In 1495 Rodrigo Locaro is described as Inquisitor of Xeros. In 1499 the sovereigns appointed Alonso de Guevara Inquisitor of Cadiz and Xeres. The tribunal continued there for some time. In 1515 Ferdinand alludes to Luis de Riba Martin, our late receiver in the Inquisition of Xeres, who in dying had left to the treasury a legacy of 30,000 emires for the relief of his conscience. I have met no later reference to it, and it probably was soon afterwards merged into the Tribunal of Seville. End of Appendix I, Part 2. Appendix II of the History of the Spanish Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1, by Henry Charles Lea. Appendix II. List of Inquisitors General. 1483. Tomás de Torquemada, appointed in 1483, died September 16, 1498. 1491. Miguel de Morillo is also Inquisitor General in 1491. Additional Inquisitors General, appointed in 1494. 1494. Martin Ponce de Leon, Archbishop of Messina, died in 1500. Inigo Manrique, Bishop of Córdoba, died March 4, 1496. Francisco Sanchez de la Fuente, Bishop of Avila, died September 1498. Alonso Suarez de Fuentesas, Bishop of Jaen, resigned in 1504, died November 5, 1520. 1498. Diego Deza, Archbishop of Sevilla, commissioned November 24, 1498, for Castile, Leon, and Granada, and September 1, 1499, for all Spain. Resigned in 1507. Died July 9, 1523. Separation of Inquisitions of Castile and Aragon. Castile, 1507. Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros, Cardinal and Archbishop of Toledo, commissioned June 5, 1507. Died November 8, 1517. Aragon, 1507. Juan Angera, Bishop of Vich, of Lereda in 1511. Commissioned June 6, 1507. Died February 14, 1513. 1513. Luis Mercader, Bishop of Tortosa, commissioned July 15, 1513. Died June 1, 1516. Fray Juan Pedro de Paul, Dominican Provincial of Aragon, also commissioned by Leo X. Died in 1516. 1516. Adrian of Utrecht, Cardinal and Bishop of Tortosa, commissioned November 14, 1516. Reunion of Inquisitions of Castile and Aragon. 1518. Cardinal Adrian of Utrecht, commissioned March 14, 1518. Elected to papacy January 9, 1522. Continued to act until his departure for Rome from Tarragona, August 4, 1522. 1523. Alfonso Manrique, Cardinal and Archbishop of Sevilla, commissioned September 10, 1523. Died September 28, 1538. 1539. Juan Pardo de Tavera, Cardinal and Archbishop of Toledo, appointed June 10, 1539. Commissioned November 7, 1539. Took possession December 7, 1539. Died August 1, 1545. 1546. Francisco Garcia de Loaisa, Archbishop of Sevilla, commissioned February 18, 1546. Took possession March 29, 1546. Died April 22, 1546. 1547. Fernando Valdez, Archbishop of Sevilla, commissioned January 20, 1547. Took possession February 19, 1547. Resigned in 1566. Died December 9, 1568. 1566. Diego Espinosa, Cardinal and Bishop of Sigüenza, commissioned September 8, 1566. Took possession December 4, 1566. Died September 15, 1572. 1572. Pedro Ponce de Leon y Córdoba, Bishop of Plasencia, commissioned December 7, 1572. Did not take possession. His brief arrived 4 hours after his death, January 17, 1573. 1573. Gaspar de Quiroga, Cardinal and Archbishop of Toledo, commissioned April 20, 1573. Took possession May 28, 1573. died November 12, 1594. 1595. Geronimo Manrique de Lara, Bishop of Avila, commissioned August 1, 1595, died November 1, 1595. 1596. Pedro de Portocarrero, Bishop of Cuenca, commissioned January 1, 1596, resigned in 1599, died September 20, 1600. 1599. Fernando Niño de Guevara, Cardinal and Archbishop of Seville, commissioned August 11, 1599, took possession December 23, 1599, resigned in 1602, died January 1, 1609. 1602. Juan de Zuniga, Bishop of Cartagena, commissioned July 29, 1602, died December 20, 1602. 1603. Juan Bautista Acevedo, Royal Confessor and Patriarch of the Indies, commissioned January 20, 1603, died July 8, 1608. 1608. Bernardo de Sandoval y Roxas, Cardinal and Archbishop of Toledo, commissioned September 12, 1608, died December 7, 1618. 1619. Luis de Aliaga, Royal Confessor, commissioned January 4, 1619, resigned in 1621, died December 3, 1626. 1622. Andres Pacheco, Bishop of Cuenca, commissioned February 12, 1622, died April 7, 1626. 1627. Antonio de Zapata, Cardinal and Archbishop of Burgos, 1600 to 1605, commissioned January 30, 1627, resigned in 1632, died April 23, 1635. 1632. Antonio de Sotomayor, Royal Confessor and Archbishop of Damascus, commissioned July 17, 1632, resigned June 21, 1643, died in 1648. 1643. Diego de Arce y Reynoso, Bishop of Plasencia, commissioned September 18, 1643, took possession November 14, 1643, died June 20, 1665. 1665. Pascal de Aragon, Archbishop of Toledo, a document of October 26, 1665, is drafted in his name, resigned soon afterwards. 1666. Juan Everardo Nethardo, Royal Confessor and Cardinal, commissioned October 15, 1666, banished February 25, 1669, as ambassador to Rome, died in 1681. 1669. Diego Sarmiento de Valadares, Bishop of Plasencia, commissioned September 15, 1669, died January 29, 1695. 1695. Juan Tomas de Rocoberti, Archbishop of Valencia, commissioned August 2, 1695, died June 13, 1699. 1699. Alfonso Fernandez de Cordova y Aguilar, died September 19, 1699, before the arrival of his brief. 1699. Balthazar de Mendoza y Sandoval, Bishop of Segovia, commissioned October 31, 1699, resigned in 1705, died November 4, 1727. 1705. Vidal Marin, Bishop of Ceuta, commissioned March 24, 1705, died March 10, 1709. 1709. Antonio Ibanez de Riva Herrera, Archbishop of Saragossa, commissioned April 5, 1709, died September 3, 1710. 1711. Francisco Guidis, Cardinal, commissioned June 11, 1711, resigned in 1716, died October 10, 1725. 1715. Felipe Antonio Gil de Taboada, commissioned February 28, 1715, did not serve. 1717. Joseph de Molines, proclaimed January 9, 1717, while in Rome, detained in Milan by the Austrians and died there. Juan de Arzamendi, died without serving. 1720. Diego de Astorga y Cespedes, Bishop of Barcelona, commissioned March 26, 1720, resigned in 1720, died February 9, 1724. 1720. Juan de Camargo, Bishop of Pamplona, commissioned July 18, 1720, died May 24, 1733. 1733. Andres de Orbe y Lateregu, Archbishop of Valencia, commissioned July 28, 1733, died August 4, 1740. 1742. Manuel Isidro Manrique de Lara, Archbishop of Santiago, commissioned January 1, 1742, died January 10, 1746. 1746. Francisco Perez de Prado y Cuesta, Bishop of Teruel, appointed July 26, 1746, commissioned August 22, 1746, died in July 1755. 1755. Manuel Quintano Boniface, Archbishop of Pharsalia, commissioned August 11, 1755, resigned in 1774, died December 18, 1775. 1775. Felipe Bertrand, Bishop of Salamanca, appointed December 27, 1774, commissioned February 27, 1775, took possession May 5, 1775, died November 30, 1783. 1784. Augustin Rubin de Ceballos, Bishop of Jaen, appointed January 23, 1784, commissioned February 17, 1784, took possession June 7, 1784, died February 8, 1793. 1793. Manuel Abad y la Sierra, Archbishop of Salimbria, took possession May 11, 1793, resigned in 1794, died January 12, 1806. 1794. Francisco Antonio de Lorenzana, Archbishop of Toledo, took possession September 12, 1794, resigned in 1797, died April 17, 1804. 1798. Ramon Joseph de Arce y Reynoso, Archbishop of Saragossa, resigned March 22, 1808, died in Paris February 16, 1814. 1814. Xavier Mier y Campillo, Bishop of Almeria, took possession in August 1814. In a series of documents he ceases to appear about June 1818, and for some months the Suprema acts as in a vacancy. 1818. Geronimo Castillon y Salas, Bishop of Tarazona. The earliest document in which I have met his signature is dated October 21, 1818. He had no successor, and died April 20, 1835. End of Appendix II. Appendix III of History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume I. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume I, by Henry Charles Lea. Appendix III. Spanish Coinage. The question of values has significance in so many of the operations of the Inquisition that an outline of the successive mintages of Spain becomes almost a necessity. The subject is complicated, after the middle of the 16th century, by the progressive but fluctuating depreciation in the moneda de vellon, or base coinage, which became practically the standard of value in all transactions. The monetary unit of Castile was the maravedi, anciently a gold coin of value, but in the 15th century diminished to a fraction of its former estimation. A declaration of Ferdinand and Isabella in 1503 says that formerly the silver real was equal to 3 maravedis, but now it is worth 34. The unit of weight was the mark, or half-pound, of 8 ounces or 4,608 grains. The intermediate weights were the ochavo of 78 grains, the adarme of 36, and the tomen of 12. These were applicable to all the precious metals, but, up to 1731, the mark of gold was reckoned to contain 50 castellanos of 8 tomines, making 4,800 grains, whereby the grain was reduced 1/25. The standard of fineness was fixed, by Ferdinand and Isabella, for gold at 23 3/4 carats, but was reduced by Charles V to 22 carats, at which it remained. For silver, the standard maintained since the 14th century was known as 11 dineros 4 granos, pure silver being 12 dineros, equivalent to .925 fine. In 1709, Philip V reduced it to 11 dineros, or .91667, and in some mintages even lower. Gold coins. When Ferdinand and Isabella revised the coinage, in 1497, they ordered the mark to be worked into 65 1/3 excelentes de la Granada. This coin was worth 374 maravedis, and was thus practically the same as the ducat or escudo, which was rated at 374. There were also the double alfonse or castellano or peso de oro, equal to 485, the double de la banda to 365, the florin to 265. Thus the ducat, which was the coin most frequently quoted, was equivalent to 11 silver reales. The ratio between gold and silver fluctuated between 7 and 8 to 1. In 1537 Charles V ordered coronas and escudos, 22 carats fine, to be worked 68 to the mark, and to be worth 330 maravedis, which he says was the weight and fineness of the best crowns of Italy and France. With the progressive depreciation in the value of silver, the coinage law of Philip II in 1566 raised the escudo from 330 marks to 400. From 330 maravedis to 400. The old ducats were to be current at 429 maravedis, the castellanos at 544. The tendency of silver continued downward, and in 1609 Philip III permitted the escudo to pass for 440 maravedis, threatening 3 years' exile and a fine of 500 ducats for asking or receiving more. In 1612 he allowed the castellano in bullion to be sold for 576 maravedis, under the same penalties for exceeding it. The escudo or crown remained the standard gold coin. In 1642 it was raised to 550 maravedis, in 1643 to 612, and then reduced to 510, owing to variations in the silver and vellon coinage. In 1651 it is rated at 16 silver reals, in 1652 at 14, in 1686 at 15, but with the new coinage of lighter weight silver it was raised to 19, and the doblon, or piece of 2 escudos, to 40 reals. For larger transactions multiples of the escudo were struck, known as doblones de a dos, de a cuatro, and de a ocho, containing respectively 2, 4, and 8 escudos. The latter, which became popularly known as the Spanish doubloon, were rated in 1726 at 18 pesos, or pieces of 8 silver reals, in 1728 at 16, in 1737 at 15, and in 1779 at 16 again, the doubloon and the peso being virtually of the same weight, each a fraction under an ounce. In 1738, to supply the lack of silver money, there were coined half-crowns of gold, worth in vellon 18 reals 28 maravedis. This fraction was troublesome, and in 1742 the weight was changed to correspond with 20 reales, and the coins became known as ventenos or escuditos. Silver coins. The silver unit was the real, which, under the coinage laws of Ferdinand and Isabella, was worked 67 to the silver mark, of 11 dineros 4 grains fine, .925, worth 34 maravedis. It long continued of this standard, but in the financial mismanagement under Philip IV, the weight was reduced by ordering the mark worked into 83 reals and 1 cartillo, 83 1/4 reals, the old coinage in circulation being advanced 25 per cent. In value by making the peso equivalent to 10 reals instead of 8, but as this failed to afford the expected relief it was suspended in 1643, to be again tried in 1684, when the real was reduced to 84 to the mark, and the old coinage was rated at 10 to 8 of the new. In 1709 we first hear of the peseta, a name applied to the French coin introduced by the War of Secession, rated at 2 reals, and subsequently used to denote the double real of Spanish mintage. At the same time the standard was reduced to 11 dineros or .91667 fine. During the subsequent years of the reign of Philip V, the variations in the silver coinage were numerous and perplexing. The peso, escudo de plata, or piece of 8 reals, was the leading coin, and in 1726 it was ordered that it, whether minted in the Indies or in Spain, should be current for 9 1/2 reals, and, as this did not bring it to an equivalent with gold, in 1728 it was declared equal to 10 reals. This, however, was now confined to the mintage of the Indies, which came to be known as plata nacional. The small coinage of the Spanish mints was termed provincial, and was allowed to remain current at a discount of 20%. It was 77 reals to the mark, and the fineness was only 10 dineros, reduced in 1728 to 9 dineros, 22 grains, or .798 fine, rendering it in reality only about 3/4 the value of the standard. There were thus two entirely distinct silver currencies coexistent, and to these was added a third, popularly known as Marias, plata nueva que vulgarmente se llaman Marias, which was called in by decree of April 27, 1728, but which was still in circulation in 1736. Under these circumstances considerable circumlocution was necessary when quoting sums in silver, to define the exact kind of coin meant, as, for instance, in the coinage law of July 16, 1730, we are told that the allowance for expenses to the official known as the fiel was un real de plata provincial, valor de 16 cuartos de velon. In fact, as we shall see, the debased coinage known as vellon had become the real standard of financial transactions. In the later periods it will simplify the appreciation of amounts recorded to remind the reader that the peso, or piece of 8 reals, is the modern dollar, and the real, or 1/8 of this, is the coin familiarly known of old in various parts of the United States as the bit, the 11-penny bit, shortened to levy, the 9 pence, or the shilling. The maraveda was 1/34 of this, or about 3/8 of 1 cent. In the colonies there is frequent allusion to the peso ensayado as distinguished from the peso de a ocho, which I gather to be a piece worth 400 maravedas, or nearly 11 3/4 reals, a little more than a ducat. Vellon coinage. The debased coinage known as vellon was an alloy of silver arid copper, which proved the source of unutterable confusion in Spanish finance. As we find it prescribed by Ferdinand and Isabella in 1497, it is merely a token coin convenient for small transaction, consisting of 7 grains of silver to the mark of copper, worked into 192 blancas, the blanca being 1/2 of the maravedi. Complaints were made that it was exported at a profit, so that it became scarce, and in 1552, Charles V, to remedy this, reduced the silver to 5 grains. The extravagant expenditures of Philip II rendered him eager to clutch at any expedient to relieve immediate necessities, and in 1566 he adopted the unfortunate device of issuing a moneda de vellon rica, with 2 1/2 dineros, 2 grains, 98 grains of silver to the mark of copper, to be worked into cuartillos, 80 to the mark, worth 1/4 real or 8 1/2 maravedis, into cuartos, 170 to the mark, worth 4 maravedis, and medios cuartos, 340 to the mark, worth 2 maravedis. The blancas, or half maravedis, were retained, but the silver in them was reduced to 4 grains to the mark, worked into 220 pieces. Although there do not appear ever to have been larger coins of vellon issued than those authorized by Philip II, the flood of this inferior money supplanted the precious metals. It became the basis of all internal transactions, and the precious metals were reduced virtually to the position of commodities. There was a restamping of this coinage in 1602, in which the silver was omitted, put into forced circulation at a value of 7 to 2. With all the power of Spain, backed by the treasures of the New World and wielded by an autocratic monarchy, it was impossible to maintain so vicious and artificial a currency at par, and there followed, during the 17th century, a series of the most desperate attempts to remedy the evils which were crippling the commerce and industry of the nation. In 1619 there was a solemn promise made that no more of the pernicious stuff should be issued for 20 years, a promise only made to be broken, and renewed in 1632. In 1625, under the severest penalties, the premium on gold and silver was limited to 10%, and in 1628 the nominal value was reduced one-half. But in 1636 the permissible premium on silver was recognized as 25%, immediately after which the vellon coinage was restamped and trebled in value. In 1640 the premium was allowed to be 28%, and in 1641 there was another restamping and the value was doubled, followed by recognizing the premium as 50%. In some accounts before me of the salaries and expenses of the Supreme Council of the Inquisition, not dated, but evidently belonging to this period, the figures set down are increased when added, in one case by 28%, and in another by 50%, to adjust them to the currency in which they were expected to be paid. In other statements some items are specified as payable in vellon and others in plata. In the effort to bring the vellon to par in 1642, it was suddenly reduced to 1/6 of its current value, and then, in 1643, it was raised fourfold. This resulted, in 1647, in a premium of 25%, but when, in 1651, it was again restamped and restored to the value which it bore prior to 1642, the premium rose to 50%. In June 1652, another attempt was made to reduce it to 1/4, but this seems to have been a failure, and in November the edict was suspended. In 1660 its further issue was suspended, and the experiment was again tried of an alloy containing 20 grains of silver to the mark, or about 1/230, which became known as the moneda de molino de vellon ligado. This was so unsuccessful that in 1664 its nominal value was reduced to one-half, and all other vellon currency was prohibited, while in February 1680 a still further reduction of 75% in its value was ordered, and in May its use was forbidden. It was declared to have no value as currency, and the premium of 50% was permitted as against other vellon coins, which had still continued in circulation. This lasted for 4 years, when in 1684 the moneda de molino was restored to circulation with a nominal value double that of the last reduction. With the 18th century the pretense of alloying copper with a fraction of silver was abandoned. In 1718 a pure copper coinage was issued, and by this time the premium on specie recognized by law had advanced to nearly 100%. In spite of the prohibition to ask or receive more than this, people were forced to pay more. Traders kept the copper coinage tied up in bags representing the larger coins, and refused to furnish the latter except at an advance. The premium gradually rose, until, in 1737, the Real de Plata Provincial was recognized legally as worth 2 reals de vellon, and the Real Plata Nacional as worth 2.5. Although there were no coined reals de vellon, they were the standard money of account on which all transactions were based. In the laws regulating the mints, the salaries of the officials are always stated in vellon. Thus, in 1718, the superintendent of the Mint of Madrid has 24,000 reals de vellon, the treasurer 16,000, and so forth. In 1728 the superintendent is allowed 500 escudos de vellon, the contador 400, etc. In 1730 it is provided that the sum of 120,000 reals de vellon is to be placed in the hands of the treasurer for current expenses, and he is to give in security 20,000 ducados de vellon on unencumbered real estate. From this it follows that, when the kind of coin is not specified, there may be some difficulty in estimating the value of a sum of money mentioned. The difference between silver and vellon went on increasing. In 1772, when a new coinage of gold and silver was issued, the gold escudo, worth 16 reals de plata, was declared to be worth 37.5 reals de vellon. With the Revolution the old coinage passed away and was replaced by the decimal system, the peseta and centimo being equivalent to the French franc and centime. Yet prices continued to be quoted in reals, which are now rated at 25 centimos, or about 5 cents of American money. Nothing is more difficult than to ascertain accurately the variation in the purchasing power of money, but perhaps the price of labor affords the most trustworthy standard. In the 15th century this would seem to have been about 6 maravedis a day. In the 18th, common laborers employed in the mints received 3.5 reals de vellon per diem, while those in more confidential positions, such as watchmen, were paid 6. As a matter of course, the kingdoms of the Crown of Aragon had their independent systems of coinage, which were based on the old divisions of the mark, almost everywhere prevalent, of libras, sueldos, and dineros, or pounds, shilling, and pence, there being 20 sueldos to the libra, and 12 dineros to the sueldo. In the documents of the early period there are frequent fluctuations in the relations between these coins and the Castilian system, but as a rule there were reckoned 20 Aragonese sueldos to the ducat, which therefore was equivalent to the libra. In Catalonia the sueldo barcelonese was 24 to the ducat, and there was also a coin known as morabatin, equal to 9 sueldos. Unification of currency throughout the monarchy was a desirable object, long frustrated by the stubborn particularism of the provinces. It was especially difficult to bring about in Catalonia, where the vellon coinage had been largely diluted by the allies during their long occupation of the principality in the War of Succession. An edict of 1733 informs us that there were 24 dineros to the Catalan real, but most of those in circulation of the coinage of 1653 had been restamped by the allies to double their nominal value. They had also coined dinerios catalanes, with the same alloy of silver as the mintage of 1653, but with only half the weight, yet circulated at the full value. The edict denounces the dinerios of both Aragon and Catalonia as an intolerable abuse, and with superfluous emphasis orders that their use be abandoned immediately in Aragon and Catalonia as soon as sufficient money of vellon can be coined to take their place. The effect was futile, for another edict of 1737 assimilates the dinerillo of Aragon and Valencia to the Castilian ochavo, or piece of 2 maravedis, and the dinerillo of Catalonia to 1 maravedi. In 1743, in consequence of disputes arising between troops quartered in Catalonia and the peasants, it was ordered that the vellon money of Castile should circulate freely in Aragon, Catalonia, and Majorca. As late as 1772, an edict calls in the local small coinage of Valencia and orders it replaced with Castilian money, but this was so unsuccessful that it was followed, in 1777, with one confining the use of these coins to Valencia and forbidding their circulation elsewhere. When the unification of the currency occurred does not clearly appear, but it probably was not until the revision of the monetary system in the present century. The old cruzado of Portugal, to which reference sometimes occurs, was virtually the same as the Spanish ducat. End of Appendix III.